Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of October the 5th and 6th, 2024. Now, the main aspect this weekend is a square between Mercury and Mars. And this is what I want to look at. What does it mean for Mercury and Mars to be in square? And I'm going to be looking at examples of people and a few events who do have this aspect. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for this weekend. So just a reminder that if you happen to like this video, if you happen to enjoy it, I would be very grateful that if you liked the video, and if you are not subscribed and you enjoy the video, then I would be really happy if you were to subscribe, because it does make apparently a big difference to the channel. So let's look at what's happening over the weekend. So there, by the way, is Mars, and with the Mercury square Mars symbols overlaid on top of it. So looking at the chart for the weekend, we can see that, well, this chart is set for the middle of the weekend in New York. I mean, there's no particular reason it has to be New York. It's just a matter of convenience. And we can see that halfway through the weekend, the moon is in Scorpio. So it is very much a moon in Scorpio weekend. So there are a lot of planets in water signs. I mean, we've got the sun in, we've got the sun in Libra, but we've got the moon in Scorpio, we've got Venus in Scorpio, we have got Saturn in Pisces, and we have got Mars in Cancer, and Neptune in Pisces as well. So that's the chart. In fact, this weekend we have got a Grand Trine. You can see that the moon is sort of conjunct Venus, and the moon is making a trine to Mars, and the moon is sort of making a trine to Saturn. So yeah, so we've got a lot of stuff in water signs, sort of half the planets in water. So it is perhaps quite an emotional weekend. Emotional in the sense that perhaps things are flowing, and perhaps we're able to express ourselves more than usual, maybe, at least on an emotional level. Though having said that, we've got Moon and Venus in Scorpio, and so I suppose with Moon and Venus in Scorpio, there may be a certain tendency to keep feelings to ourselves. It can be a little bit brooding having Moon and Venus in Scorpio. I mean, Moon and Venus, I suppose, don't particularly work well in this sign. You know, the moon is fallen in Scorpio, Venus is in its detriment in Scorpio. So there's a sense in which we're perhaps a little bit protective about our feelings. Now, as far as the difference between Saturday and Sunday is concerned, I mean, I don't think that there's a great deal of difference there. I mean, on Saturday we have the moon is applying to a conjunction of Venus, and it's also making the trine to Mars, and so that's what we're moving into. Then on Sunday we've got the Mercury square Mars, but I wouldn't worry too much about whether that Mercury square Mars is Saturday or Sunday. I think the Mercury square Mars represents the overall theme for the weekend. And Mercury square Mars, I mean, I'll be talking about Mercury square Mars in greater detail later in the video, but you know, Mercury is about how we communicate, and it's also how we think. And I suppose if it's square Mars, there could be a certain amount of agitation, and that agitation may be expressed, you know, in the things we say. We may show our annoyance or our impatience, and in terms of the way our mind is working, there may be a certain tension there. We want things to happen and maybe they're not happening, and maybe we want to force the pace. But it might make some of us a little bit nervous with that Mercury square Mars. And as far as aspects are concerned, we've got the moon is sort of moving into late Scorpio. It's there's the moon, and the moon is there's the moon, and it's starting to make a trine to Neptune. It's making a it's starting to make a sextile to Pluto as well, and we shouldn't forget an opposition with Uranus. So that moon opposition Uranus could be quite a significant event. And I think with moon opposition Uranus at a time when Mercury is square Mars, it does add to a feeling of tension, that something has to give, that we just want something to happen, it's not happening, and that could make us nervous. Now, looking at the weekend from a Australian perspective, i.e. perspective of Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, because it could be a bit different. So look at the moon. The middle of a weekend, midnight on Sunday, set for New York, the moon is in Scorpio. But if you have the same chart, at least the middle of a weekend, but set for Sydney, the moon is at 13 Scorpio. So the moon is earlier, and I think that if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the weekend perhaps is going to be more about the moon making that application to the conjunction of Venus, the trine to Mars, especially on late on Saturday. But if you're in the United States, the moon will just be that much later. Perhaps if you're in the United States, that moon conjunct Venus is going to be more at the beginning of a weekend. So there's a slight difference between the two, but it doesn't matter where you are. The moon is definitely in Scorpio. Now, one thing about the moon in terms of the Americas is that the moon does go into Sagittarius on Monday at 0 degrees 34 London time. So that means late afternoon, early evening on Sunday in the Americas, the moon will change sign from Scorpio to Sagittarius. So that will bring a change late in the weekend. If you are in the Americas, suddenly things might be, I don't know, they might be more fun late on Sunday in the Americas. There may be more excitement. It may feel that something is happening, and you may be able to make connections which in the past you just haven't been able to make. When I say connections, I'm talking about sort of ideas. There'll be more possibilities, and there'll be less of the sort of emotional staticness of Scorpio, because Scorpio does kind of like to stay in one place, at least in terms of its emotions. And so late on Sunday, there may be some movement in that direction. Turning to the heliocentric picture, so this is where we put the sun in the center of the solar system, where it should be. So that's the heliocentric picture, and I'm not sure if there is a great deal to report there. Nothing particularly comes to mind with this. Just a reminder that Mars is starting to move towards a conjunction of Jupiter. It's still got a long way to go. It's sort of probably another week before that Mars-Jupiter conjunction becomes exact. But still, we may be feeling it a little bit. Maybe some of us may be feeling sort of an increased level of energy there, and we might feel that things are starting to happen, and we might feel that there's something we want to do or something we should be doing, or it may not be us, it just may be the world around us. It's just a feeling that something has to happen, something has to give. But overall, I think heliocentrically, it's not really a particularly interesting weekend, and I don't think that there is a great deal to report. So I'm now going to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of October the 5th and 6th, 2024. Aries. Aries, you are still in a state of mind where you're feeling perhaps a little bit vulnerable. I mean, it's not that you are vulnerable, it just might be that that's the way you feel. You perhaps are aware that it's a complicated world out there, and that maybe you have to tread carefully. Things can happen that you weren't expecting, that you weren't planned for, and you may be very aware of other people's feelings. Other people's feelings might seem a little bit complicated, and you may be worried that if you say the wrong thing, you might get a negative emotional response. And, don't forget your own emotions. I think that you are more emotional than usual, and things affect you perhaps more than usual. I mean, as an Aries, you like to be sort of quite assertive, and what comes in goes out just as quickly. We need that action, we need that movement, but that movement that you enjoy is just not quite there at the moment. And this may reflect the fact that there's nothing in fire. There hasn't been anything in fire for quite a long time. And, sure, we've got Chiron and the North Node in Aries, but it's not quite the same thing. With nothing in Sagittarius, nothing in Leo, only Chiron and the North Node in Aries. So it may just feel that you don't get the sort of the inspiration that you're perhaps looking for. Okay, it's true that the moon does move into Sagittarius very late on Sunday, and well, not very late, but late afternoon, early evening if you're in the Americas. But by that time the weekend is already gone, and if you're not in the Americas, the moon doesn't move into Sagittarius until Monday. So where is the fire, where is the spark? And that is certainly, I think, going to have an influence on you. So you might then feel somewhat frustrated, and we should not forget that this weekend there is a square aspect between Mercury and Mars, and Mercury is a planet related to communication. It's how we talk, it's also how we think, and square Mars, there is an agitation there. And I think that it may just be that you're getting just a bit frustrated. Perhaps there just hasn't been movement for so long. You just want something to happen. Something has to happen, and you just want to say something, and it's beginning to really kind of frustrate you. And I think it's then important that you don't take your feelings out on other people. Just because you're annoyed about something, just because things aren't moving fast enough, doesn't mean that you have to show your annoyance. It's better, I think, for you to perhaps be, a little more patient, and perhaps do things where you don't need any outside support or inspiration. I mean, I suppose the phrase I was looking for is cabin fever. I think you actually may feel a bit of cabin fever. If I've understood cabin fever correctly, it's about just being stuck in one place, and maybe it feels like you're stuck in the snow. Of course, it isn't going to be snow at this time of year, I don't think, but it's just you want something to happen and it's not happening, and that could be annoying. But at the same time, you're kind of aware that outside your immediate zone of control, things are happening, and it's connected with the world around you. You can see it, and maybe that's making it worse. You can see that things are happening in other parts of the world, things that bother you, but there's nothing you can do. So I think, Aries, you perhaps have to deal with the illusion of powerlessness. It is an illusion of powerlessness, because the reality is it's very difficult for any of us to do anything particularly dramatic at the moment, and you just feel you should be doing something, but you can't do anything. And so that might be just a little bit annoying for you. Though the moon is making a trine to Mars, and that moon trine Mars does indicate that if you can just focus on something that's just important to you, that doesn't require anyone else's help or assistance or feedback, then yeah, I think that you can actually make good progress. It may not be satisfying progress, because you may just feel dissatisfied, but if you just keep moving, you do what you can, you do what's available to you, using the tools that are available to you. If the tools aren't available, then that's just the way it goes. So look at what's in front of you, Aries, and just try to make the most of it. Taurus, Venus is in Scorpio, as you know, and it's part of a Grand Trine this weekend, because this weekend we have got the moon conjunct Venus, and this moon-Venus conjunction is trine Mars, and the moon-Venus conjunction is sort of trine Saturn. And so I think that does give you a certain amount of energy. It does help to, I think, propel things, and you can perhaps make things move, especially on an emotional level. You know that you don't have to go anywhere, I don't think, this weekend. You can take what's in front of you and you can sort of make it happen, and your feelings are strong, and also you can be or should be quite sensitive to the people around you, people's feelings, and you might get a certain sense of what people are going to do next and what they're thinking and planning. It's nothing that really has to be talked about. You just kind of understand it. It sort of makes sense, and so there are a lot of unspoken signals, Taurus, that I think at the moment that you're able to pick up on. Now, there is a danger in certain cases that you might feel a little bit overwhelmed. I think that you may be quick to pick up on other people's negativity. Some people are feeling negative this weekend. It is a kind of a weekend where there are strong feelings flying around, and some of those feelings could be negative. It could even be a little bit destructive. And so we maybe have to, or you perhaps have to work with these feelings, and perhaps try to understand where they are going and where they're trying to push you. And so, Taurus, if you come across people who have a very negative view of the world, then you need to sort of get that in perspective, and you shouldn't, if possible, sort of pick up on that negativity and allow it to sort of take over. And also, I suppose, Taurus, it can be a case that you explore things too much. You know, if you explore things too much, you might start to see how things could go wrong. If you ask perhaps too many questions, you know, you can see it. And I think to an extent you are picking up on other people's uncertainty. So maybe with this Grand Trine in water, you know, the Grand Trine sounds nice, but Grand Trines in water can get out of control. And it may not be your negativity, but it might be other people's negativity. And you don't want to get swept up in it. And you need to, I think, be able to look at things from your perspective and, I suppose, try to be as independent as possible. Now, that could be difficult because, you know, there is this conjunction between the Moon and Venus in Scorpio, your opposite sign. Now, this Moon-Venus conjunction, there is a good side to the Moon-Venus conjunction. It could be very good in terms of relationships if you want to get very close to someone, you know, on an emotional level with this Moon conjunct Venus in Scorpio. I think you can, but it just may be that you're overly influenced by another person's emotional state of being, and yeah, it could be quite overwhelming. So that means, Taurus, it would be a good idea if you had a strong sense of your own boundaries, because you don't want to get overwhelmed by anyone's emotions, particularly today. You know, that Grand Trine in water is potentially difficult because, you know, when you're dealing with other people's emotions, you don't really know where they're going. You don't know what their source is, and it can be very complicated. So by all means, recognize other people and understand their importance, but don't allow them to have too much of an influence on you. Gemini, you have, I think, a good understanding of what is happening around you. You can see it, and you can think about it, and perhaps even you can feel it as well. There is a sense that nothing is quite right. Again, it's not about you. It's just about the world in which you're living. And you might be of a view that what happens somewhere else, even if it's thousands of miles away, is important to you. And you're just aware that, I don't know, in some ways there is a tragedy to life. And I'm kind of saying it in a philosophical way, that is perhaps part of the human experience. And, you know, that's a reminder that, you know, Gemini can be quite existential in its way of looking at the world. That life is difficult. It not only has sometimes a fragility to it, but also a sort of a pointlessness to it. You know, remember Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher? He had his sun in Gemini, and, you know, when you see tragedy, you know, you're asking why. And again, I must emphasize, I'm not talking about a tragedy for you. I'm just talking about the tragedy that is all around us. It's a tragedy of the human condition, and it's also perhaps the tragedy of particular places on Earth where you're aware that tragedies are unfolding. You know, whether that's in Ukraine or Russia or the Middle East, it's unfolding all the time. And yeah, it does have an impact on you. And, you know, maybe that is a reminder that Mercury is moving towards an opposition of Chiron, And okay, that Mercury-Chiron opposition is not there quite yet, but I think you're starting to pick up on it. And Chiron is about being able to pick up on other people's wounds, other people's hurt. And so, Gemini, however comfortable you are, indeed, maybe particularly if you're comfortable, you're thinking, why should I be comfortable when other people are so uncomfortable, when other people might be in a state of misery? That is not right. How can I relax when other people are not being able to relax? And if you're feeling that, perhaps it's a good thing. I mean, perhaps it's a reminder that Geminis really have a human streak, and maybe maybe the humanity of Gemini, which is sometimes hidden or overlooked, is coming to the surface. And Mercury is not just opposition Chiron; it's pretty close to true black moon Lilith, so it's moving in that direction. In fact, this weekend there is an opposition between Chiron and true black moon Lilith, and the Chiron true black moon Lilith is, that's quite a dark opposition. It is about, I think, wounds and deep wounds, and wounds which go back maybe years, maybe decades, old wounds. Maybe Libra, maybe Gemini, perhaps you are thinking about your own old wounds, things that happened to you a long time ago, and you're still thinking about it, you're still concerned about it. And with Mercury moving towards that opposition, not just over the weekend, but with Mercury moving to the opposition of Chiron and the conjunction of true black moon Lilith over the next couple of days, it's going to be a time when things, I think, are just a little bit heavier than usual. But really, Gemini, I kind of think this is all quite a good thing. I think this weekend is perhaps demonstrating to you, maybe to other people as well, the depth of your personality. Gemini sometimes does have a reputation for just skimming the surface and just for just being into one thing, spend a few minutes here, move on, never get into anything too deeply. I think there is something quite deep about this weekend for Geminis, and you are going to take things seriously. And we should not forget that Mercury, your ruler, is making a square to Mars, and that Mercury square Mars may represent annoyance. Something is annoying you, something perhaps makes you feel angry and agitated. Now, it might be just your own thoughts, your thoughts perhaps driving you a bit crazy, or it just could be someone else's behavior that you don't find to be reasonable. And if you have a set of feelings or a set of opinions, I think you're going to want to talk about them and discuss them and make a special effort to ensure that other people understand perhaps why you're annoyed. And so, Gemini, what do I advise? You can't repress the way you feel. At the same time, you're capable of showing a little bit of sensitivity. Different people have different thresholds, and you don't want to push anyone too far. But Gemini, I suppose if something has to be said, it has to be said, and in which case, the sooner you get it out of the way, the better. Cancer, the moon is in Scorpio pretty much all weekend. Okay, the moon does move into Sagittarius late afternoon, early evening in the Americas, but I think on Sunday, that is, of course. That's right at the end of a weekend. But by and large, Cancer, it's a moon in Scorpio weekend, and I think that is a good thing. The moon likes being in Scorpio, and as I discussed yesterday, well, let me rephrase that. The moon, in a general sense, does not like being in Scorpio, because the moon is fallen in Scorpio. So don't quote me out of context by saying the moon likes being in Scorpio. The moon likes being in Scorpio, I think, if you are a Cancerian. Scorpio as a sign, it's quite a difficult place for the moon to be in general, but if you're a Cancerian, it's a different matter, because as a Cancerian, you are an emotional person, and Scorpio is a fairly emotional sign, and so when the moon is in Scorpio, you are able to understand and express your feelings, and also you're able to understand other people's feelings. And in terms of your own feelings, I think that you're able to do something with them. So if you feel strongly about something, you're able to harness those feelings and put them to use. It can be very useful being sensitive, understanding what people are thinking and what people are feeling, especially this weekend when we do have a Grand Trine in water signs. We've got a Moon-Venus conjunction in Scorpio, and we've got that Moon-Venus conjunction is trine Mars in Cancer, and that in turn is trine Saturn. So emotionally, Cancer, things are flowing, and I do think that this Grand Trine could work in two ways. Let's start off by looking at the sort of a negative side of this Grand Trine. So Grand Trines are about fast movement. Emotions can move quickly, and perhaps they can move too quickly. And so Cancer, you don't want to get overwhelmed by your emotions. You're an emotional person anyway, but there is, I suppose, some danger that you could just get a bit too emotional. On the other hand, though, this Grand Trine does involve Saturn, and Saturn can be quite good at controlling things and creating a structure. So I think with this Grand Trine, it gives you a chance to structure your feelings and actually harness your feelings. And that may mean that this Grand Trine can actually be very creative. It allows you to concentrate your feelings on particular things, and if you have any creative or artistic abilities, then I do think that this Grand Trine is going to be incredibly useful. So I don't know, if you're spending the weekend painting a picture or starting to paint a picture, then you'll be able to come up with some incredible things, and you'll be able to just put on canvas, whatever you're picking up emotionally. And it's not just in terms of painting, it could be about writing. If you're writing poetry, if you're just trying to express the way you feel, and you don't have to be a professional writer or artist to do that. If you've got some creative way of expressing the way you feel, then with this Grand Trine in water, I very much think that you're going to be able to do it. And I do think this Grand Trine could actually be extremely useful. And we shouldn't forget that the moon on Sunday is making a trine to Neptune, and that moon trine Neptune is very artistic. It's incredibly imaginative, and you can just pick up on what's going on in the world, what's going on in the cosmos, and you can understand it, and in some ways bring it down to earth without in any way diminishing it. And I think that is good. Sometimes when we take something that is really sort of cosmic, that is almost supernatural, and we try to bring it down to earth, it sort of gets changed in translation, doesn't it? I suppose that's always the problem if one thinks one is a prophet, or one is trying to tune into something supernatural, the word of some sort of divine being. When one tries to bring it down to earth, it has to go through the agency of the imperfect human, and the imperfect human can mess things up and change things to give things a human spin. But at the moment, Cancer, I think to an extent there is a stream of consciousness here, and Saturn can help structure it, but just Saturn doesn't have to change the message. Just allow the message to flow through you in an unchanged form, or in a relatively unchanged form, if that is at all possible. Leo, you are perhaps not a particularly typical Leo this weekend. I think the problem, Leo, is there's nothing in fire. At least there isn't until late on Sunday if you're in the Americas, because, there's nothing in Sagittarius, there's nothing in Leo, we've only got Chiron and a North Node in Aries. So there's perhaps a lack of inspiration. Okay, if you hold on to the end of a weekend, the moon does move into Sagittarius, and so fire is on its way, but it's not quite here yet. And so you might feel that you don't quite know what to do, or you might just feel a certain sense of being uninspired. And what are you going to do? And though I think that you are picking up on quite a lot of things. I mean, a lot of people this weekend are quite sensitive, more sensitive than usual. And I do think that this weekend there are things that you're in touch with that are perhaps of quite a high level. I mean, when I say high level, I'm talking about, the solar system, the cosmos, the outer planets. You're picking up on the messages. Quite what you do with the messages is kind of up to you. Now, when I say messages, I'm not talking necessarily about anything mediumistic or anything like that. It's just you just get a sense of the way things are going, and it does seem a little bit hard to handle. But probably the best approach is to just not feel that you have to do anything. Especially as this weekend we've got the moon conjunct Venus, and the moon and Venus are in Scorpio, and Scorpio is a very low profile sign for you. It's at the bottom of the Leo chart, and so I don't think that you necessarily want to do anything, at least in a sort of an active, real way. And that moon Venus conjunction in Scorpio is trine Mars in Cancer, and it's trine Saturn in Pisces. So if you think about it, those three signs, Scorpio, Cancer and Pisces, in the Leo chart are very introspective. They're very low profile, and I think that that's simply the way you should be, and where you should put your energy. So if you spend time at home over the weekend, I think you're going to feel comfortable, and you're going to feel pretty grounded. And so perhaps that should be the way you judge things this weekend. Is it familiar or is it not familiar? And if it's familiar, then embrace it if you're comfortable with it. If it's not familiar, something strange, maybe people you haven't met before, situations you don't fully understand, then stay away from it. You don't need variety this weekend. You might want variety. You might feel you'd like variety because there's nothing in fire, and you want to compensate. But I don't think you're going to feel comfortable if you go to a super hectic environment. In fact, I don't think anyone will feel comfortable. But things do change. If you're in the Americas on Sunday evening, the moon does move into Sagittarius, and that does give you a new spark, and it gets things moving again and allows you to be more positive and more inspired. But that's only if you're in the Americas. If you're anywhere else, it's not going to happen. And so I think you just have to understand the limitations of a weekend, and perhaps also look at how you can make the most of a weekend. And if you want to make the most of a weekend, it's about sticking to what you trust, listening to your feelings, and giving yourself the time to listen to your feelings. And it's not just your feelings, it's about something out there. As I said at the beginning of this piece on Leo, it's just tuning into something cosmic. You might not even understand what you're tuning into, but it will just feel that you're kind of in the right place. And that is a message for so many people this weekend, regardless of their sign. Sometimes things are happening so quickly that we just can't take stock of the broader picture because we're so busy. Well, Leo, you have a chance this weekend to just stay in one place and to start to take stock of it all, and to perhaps understand where it's all going. Virgo, you are perhaps not typically Virgoan this weekend. I think that you are able to move beyond some of the details. I mean, details do matter, but details perhaps this weekend are of limited importance. Because if you've got a detail, that detail tends to be fixed. If details keep changing, then they're not really details anymore. They're just part of a very confusing picture. And now is a time when you just get a feel for the complexity of everything around you. It just feels that way. And at the same time, Virgo, I do think that you're able to articulate it. And when I say articulate it, you have to remember that there are two ways of communicating. There is communication through the brain. We can conceive of that as being Mercury, and Mercury is, of course, the ruler of Virgo, and that's perhaps how you normally communicate through Virgo. But there is the other communication planet, and that other communication planet is the moon. And this weekend the moon is conjunct Venus, and I think if you want to be able to be an effective communicator, then try to communicate through your heart rather than through your brain. That's the way to do it. And that is certainly a more complicated form of communication. It's not superficial. It goes down real deep, and it's not just about words. It's about how you comport yourself. It's about body language. It's about, I suppose, your actions as well. Where are you? Where do you choose to be? So if you choose to be in one place rather than another place, even if you don't say anything, you are still communicating something. It may just be if you're in one room of your house or apartment rather than in another room, that's saying something. Are you in the bathroom? Are you in the bedroom? Are you in the living room? That means something. Or are you choosing to visit one person or another person? It's all saying something. And I think that people are picking up on that, and they understand you, and you can make yourself clear without saying anything, or without saying very much. And I think that is perhaps very useful, because it may be, Virgo, that this weekend you can broach difficult subjects without necessarily saying anything. It's all about signals. It's all about subtlety. And of course, I understand this can be a little bit difficult for a Virgo, because Virgos can be very straightforward. They like to be straightforward. If something needs to be said, you just say it. That's how it works. But no, just that subtlety could make all the difference, and it could enable you to really make a powerful impression. Now, going back to Mercury, and perhaps another reason why you should not communicate on a purely mental level is the fact that Mercury, which is of course your ruling planet, is square Mars, and that square Mars could be difficult. It might mean that if you are communicating purely on a brain level in terms of ideas and cognition, you could just say the wrong thing. You could not pick up on the details that matter. You could misunderstand other people's feelings. You could say something that gets a negative response. Now, with Mercury square Mars, there are things this weekend that could make you angry, that could make you annoyed, and you may feel you want to express your annoyance. But again, you don't have to express your annoyance through words. You can express it with your heart. And I think that is something you can do. And you shouldn't underestimate other people's sensitivity. You might take the view that people are not going to understand you unless you are 100% direct. Well, I would say that's not necessarily the case. If you are 100% direct, people might just not want to hear, and they really won't understand. But if you are subtle and you use all the cues available to you, not just the verbal cues, and you don't make the spoken word your primary form of communication, then I think you can actually get your message across. I know that sounds a little bit complicated. I mean, I'm a Gemini. I mean, I don't think I could follow my advice that I've just given you, but then I'm not giving advice to a Gemini. I'm giving advice to a Virgo. So yeah, it could be a little bit complicated, but I think if you listen to your heart, you'll be able to get it right. Libra, there is a Chiron opposition true black moon Lilith across the main axis of your chart. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Until very recently, I didn't really use Chiron, and I didn't really use true black moon Lilith. But I can't just avoid this fact that you've got, there's Libra, and true black moon Lilith is at 2112 Libra, and Chiron is at 2138 Aries. So these two planets are in opposition, and Mercury is moving towards a conjunction. Mercury in Libra is moving towards a conjunction of true black moon Lilith, and Mercury is moving towards an opposition of Chiron. So, I'm just wondering, what exactly does this mean? And, for many people this weekend, I think it is a little bit complicated. And I think when I've talked to many of the 12 signs, I've sort of talked about being in touch with higher level stuff that sort of may have have cosmic implications. So what does it mean to have this Chiron true black moon Lilith opposition? And I would have said it perhaps reminds you that nothing is entirely right with the world, that many people do feel a sense of alienation and dislocation, and at the same time they may be quite overwhelmed by the past. And I think that's part of what true black moon Lilith is about. It's about the past, and it's about what happened in the past, and it's about things that were not discussed in the past. And I suppose Chiron opposition true black moon Lilith is bringing that to the surface to an extent, or at least it's making it obvious for those that want to notice. And with Mercury in Libra, starting to make make the conjunction to true black moon Lilith and an opposition to Chiron in Aries, perhaps that's something you're starting to feel. And I'm not talking about anything personal necessarily. I'm just talking about the world in which you live. And it may be, Libra, that over the next few days, I mean, not necessarily this weekend, but just over the next few days, into the beginning of next week, you perhaps have a responsibility to voice things which perhaps other people can't voice, and that may require some thought. How are you going to be able to express things? How are you going to help other people express things? So that might be something that you perhaps need to work on. And Libra, what you mustn't do is just exist on the surface, because there are things going on under the surface that need to be noticed. And I'm kind of saying that to everyone, really, because we do have this Grand Trine in water signs, and I think that this Grand Trine in water signs does have an impact on you. Venus is starting to make a trine to Mars. Venus is trine Saturn, and with Venus in Scorpio, you are, I think, more emotional than usual, and you are starting to pick up on other people's feelings. And I think picking up on other people's feelings can be actually quite useful. And with Venus beginning to make this trine to Mars over the next couple of days, that may actually bode well for relationships, because Venus and Mars as a pair is about relationships, especially in a Libran chart. And so there's a chance here to get close to people on an emotional level, but also on a practical level as well. So if there's something practical or material, perhaps relating to money or career, that over the next few days you want to sort out, or you feel you might need help or assistance, then I think the growing influence of that trine between Venus and Mars, it could be extremely useful. And also, we shouldn't forget that Venus and Mars are trine Saturn. Both of the trine to Saturn is starting to weaken, but it's still there. And so perhaps over the weekend, you perhaps have a chance to stabilize certain relationships. It's a good time to do it, to perhaps address things which perhaps haven't been quite sorted out. You don't have to do it in a sort of a direct way, because with this Grand Trine in water signs, the emotional side of things does matter. It really is significant. And so perhaps part of what you need to do, Libra, this weekend is just to make people feel comfortable, because if you make other people feel comfortable, then you're going to start to feel comfortable yourself. But comfortable in the right way. Comfortable is not about being complacent. Complacency is about living on the surface, thinking that everything is fine, that we don't, if out of sight, out of mind. No, it's not about being out of sight, out of mind. If something needs to be brought out into the open, it needs to be brought out into the open, and that's the way it is. And so you do need to get the balance right, and it's certainly not a weekend for discounting things or just assuming that things will just go away of their own accord. I don't think that is going to happen. But overall, Libra, if you take a serious approach, then I think everything should work out in the end. Just because something is complicated doesn't mean that it should be avoided. Scorpio. Scorpios do have a great sense of justice, and you do believe there is a right way to behave and a wrong way to behave, and you don't just want to ignore the suffering of the world. That's something you cannot do. And if you become aware that something bad is happening, Scorpio, then I think it's going to concern you. And, it might even just send you on an emotional mission, perhaps. So it won't take much to set you off, I don't think. Now, that might mean, Scorpio, that your best approach is to just hide your ears. Hear no evil, see no evil, what is it, talk no evil, whatever. You could be like the three monkeys. That might be an approach, but that doesn't seem to be the right approach. I think you do have to see what's happening in the world, and I suppose you have to respond to it emotionally, and at the same time, not be completely taken over by it. We do live in an unfair world, and you're not in a position to correct every injustice out there. And perhaps it's just enough to just feel what is wrong, and just to know that there are people out there who are not happy and who are being treated unfairly. If you can do something about it, particularly if it's happening in your own community, then fair enough. Of course, you shouldn't take risks. There are limits to what you can do, but I just don't think you're not going to want to just stand by, because I think you do have a sense of justice anyway, and I think your sense of justice is going to be particularly strong over the weekend. Now, aside from that, I think that this weekend your social and interpersonal skills are actually going to be very good, and you will have a good understanding of the times in which you live, and also a good understanding of other people's sensibilities, and you'll just be able to pick up on things very quickly, pick up on people's thoughts, their feelings, their body language, and you will just know how to express yourself, and it just will be very easy. And you're going to be really helped by the fact that the moon in Scorpio is making a trine to Mars. Also, Venus is making a trine to Mars. So in fact, we have a moon conjunct Venus in Scorpio in your sign, which is trine Mars, which is your ruler. And so you're going to find it very easy to make your presence felt, and you don't have to be dramatic about it. You can just appear. You may just almost appear from nowhere. You sort of creep out of the shadows, so people can just be doing their thing, whatever they're doing, and then suddenly Scorpio just appears, and they don't quite know how Scorpio arrived, but Scorpio is, I suppose Scorpio actually this weekend, you have a certain capacity for being in the right place at the right time. There's then the question of how you communicate, and I think this weekend with this Grand Trine in water, subtlety is important, but the main, one of the main aspects, probably the main aspect this weekend, is a square aspect between Mercury and Mars. So Mars is your ruler. Mercury is a planet of communication. So there could be times when you can be very clear and cutting with your language. Maybe you just feel you have to express your annoyance or what's on your mind. Enough is enough. You have to say it. Mercury square Mars. And I think you can be very effective. It's because it just comes out of nowhere. People were assuming that Scorpio was going to say nothing. They might even think that Scorpio wasn't noticing things, and then Scorpio suddenly is assertive, and your words could be really, really powerful. And I think that the right criticism spoken at the right time could make a big difference, because there is something about Scorpios, when they're annoyed, of all the signs, they have this annoyance. I think that I think there was an astrology teacher I had who talked about Scorpios and used the term white. I'm not quite sure what she meant, but she talked about white annoyance. And by white, I mean the complexion. That somehow when someone is really annoyed, there is a sort of a whiteness to the word, a paleness which comes with the annoying words. I don't know if that makes sense to you, because I'm not a Scorpio, but maybe it makes sense to you, because if I remember rightly, the teacher was a Scorpio, and I perhaps didn't fully know what she was talking about, but maybe you as a Scorpio do know what she was talking about. Anyway, that's all for Scorpio. I hope you have a good weekend. I think you can have a good weekend, but I think it could be perhaps quite an intense weekend. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, it's perhaps a little bit of a difficult weekend because there are no planets in fire signs, at least not until Sunday afternoon, evening, if you are in the Americas. So if you're in the Americas, if you're in the Americas, then late in the weekend, Moon moves into Sagittarius, and I think that is going to be a big relief, because finally you've got something in a fire sign, and you have energy, and you have something to focus on, and your intuition is starting to move, and you can start to make connections. Now, if you're not a Sagittarius, if you're not in the Americas, then of course the Moon will move into Sagittarius on Monday. So don't worry. The cavalry is on its way, but it might not arrive this weekend. So overall this weekend, it's perhaps a little too emotional for your likings. We've got this Grand Trine in water, and this Grand Trine in water is, it's all about feelings, and it's, from your perspective, is maybe a little hidden. Things are not being revealed, and you know that things are happening under the surface, but I think it's quite difficult for you to actually articulate what's under the surface, or even understand what's under the surface. And I don't think that you should try too hard to understand what's happening, because if you jump to conclusions, then your conclusions are likely to be wrong, except perhaps if you're American, and if you're in America and you're talking about right at the end of a weekend when the Moon moves into Sagittarius. But while the Moon is moving through Scorpio, it's basically a time for watching, for observing, and not feeling that you necessarily have to engage, because I think that some Sagittarians may feel that something is holding them back. Maybe it's just a slight sense of fear, because you don't know what would happen if you were to go somewhere, if you were to talk to someone. You're not quite sure what would happen, and you're not quite sure where the situation would move. And so there is this sense of nervousness, and I think perhaps the reason you're feeling nervous is because you just don't understand what's happening. You don't fully get it, and it's okay to be in that position, and it's okay to sort of just take your time. You don't have to be in a hurry to understand what is happening, and I suppose you just have to try your best to sort of dwell in your emotions, even if you don't feel particularly emotional. You understand that with this Grand Trine in water, with Saturn trine Mars, and Moon trine Saturn, and Venus trine Saturn, that's where the power lies. And so in terms of relationships, I think it could be quite important that you don't dwell too much on, or sorry, you don't move too much into another person's territory, or into another person's, I don't know, how should I put it, into their zone. If you move into another person's zone, if you move into the land of emotions, the land of strong feelings, you may be at a disadvantage, and that's going to be fine if you're dealing with someone you trust, someone who you know you trust 100%. But if you don't trust someone 100% and you start to move into their territory, then very soon you could be completely lost and confused, and the whole thing could be really difficult. So if in doubt, just hold back and stick to places where you do feel comfortable. Capricorn, you are in a relatively sociable mood. I mean, I understand that Capricorn is perhaps not the most sociable of the 12 signs, but at the moment, Capricorn, I think that you can deal with people, and I don't think you're going to be surprised by other people's actions. And I think also you're going to have a fairly good understanding of their intentions. So Capricorn, this does mean that you can go to places without giving much away, and you can decide how much of yourself you want to reveal, and activities of a sort of a group nature, parties, whatever. I mean, they might not be a load of fun, but if anything, you can be the center of attention if that's what you want, and you will have a lot of control over your social life, and you'll just understand, and so there's not much to be afraid of there. And I think that you'll come over as being someone who can be relied on, who is trustworthy, and you can reveal as much as you want to reveal, but you don't have to reveal more than that. Now, one aspect that perhaps requires some attention is a square aspect between Mercury and Mars. Now, this Mercury-Mars square could be a little bit difficult, because a Mercury-Mars square is about how we communicate, and it can be about angry communications, or it can be about wanting things to move quickly, but not too quickly. But things might get out of control. I suppose this particular aspect, Mercury in Libra square Mars in Cancer, could be relevant if you're trying to achieve something over the weekend. I don't know what your plans are for the weekend. Maybe you've got no plans. But if you're trying to achieve something, or if you've got a set of goals or targets that you want to accomplish, then that might be a problem, especially if other people are involved. You might find that someone's approach or someone's suggestions are just not reasonable. Or you might find that there's someone who is just really stubborn, irrationally stubborn, is over-emotional, and things don't go your way because of someone else's stubbornness, intransigence, and perhaps even because of their stupidity. So I would suggest, Capricorn, that if you are trying to achieve anything this weekend, you do it on your own, and you're very wary of bringing other people into things, because people have their views, And that Mercury square Mars may encourage some people to be, totally intransigent. They won't listen to reason. They won't listen to the facts. And that could be annoying. So if something is important, do it yourself. But on a lighter note, as I've been saying, in terms of your social life, being with people, then that's fine. People are fine, provided there isn't some shared purpose, or you're trying to get it together to move towards some particular goal, or if you're working with other people in a sort of a career or business context, or that could be difficult. So do get the balance right. There are times to be on your own and do things your way, and there are other times when you can relax and you can be with other people and you can understand other people, and indeed you can enjoy their company. Aquarius, there continues to be a lot of activity in water signs, and traditionally, Aquarius, is quite dry. Aquarius is an air sign. It's ruled by Saturn, so it's not a sign that you would normally associate with heavy emotion. Indeed, one sort of key word that is often used with the sign Aquarius is detachment, and that's part of who you are. Yet this weekend's Grand Trine in water, we've got the moon conjunct Venus in Scorpio, and Scorpio is an important sign for you because it's at the top of your chart. Moon conjunct Venus, it's trine Mars, and it's trine Saturn. And this Grand Trine, which I think I talked about this yesterday when I was talking about Friday, is quite goal orientated, and for you, not for other people, but for you. And it does talk about ambition. It also talks about what you have materially, and it also talks about your capacity for hard work, and perhaps not what you wanted to hear if you're relaxing for the weekend, but with this Grand Trine and water Grand Trine gives you, Aquarius, a great sense of what you need to do and how you need to do it and what should be done. So there's work that can be done in your own way, and it may not be work that is typical for you, but it's work that somehow is important, and I suppose you have to decide how much energy you want to give to it, because if you just get a feeling this weekend that you need to do something, you just get a feeling it has to be done, let's go do it. If you get that feeling, then just listen to that feeling. You may just feel that if something isn't done this weekend, then it will never get done with this Grand Trine in water. So I would have said just listen to your feelings, and you can be detached to a certain extent, because I don't think you really need anyone's help. And at the same time, it is a Grand Trine in water. You may, believe it or not, develop some kind of passion, a passion for something, a passion that perhaps didn't exist before. And a passion, because it's a passion, it's working on an emotional level. So you might actually develop an emotional commitment towards something over the weekend. And if you have this sort of emotional commitment, then give it free flow. And I think that if there are people around you, they will understand that you're serious. You don't really have to explain. In fact, probably, Aquarius, the less explaining you do, the better for yourself, and probably the better for everyone else as well. Pisces. So Pisces is pretty much the same as yesterday in some respects. Yesterday we had a lot of stuff in water signs, and Pisces, you're a water sign. Now we have, we continue to have 5 planets in water signs, Moon, Venus in Scorpio, Mars in Cancer, Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, and you being a watery person, you very much feel this. You feel comfortable with it. And it's a situation perhaps where other people are not entirely comfortable with what is happening, but you are. And you kind of understand where it's all going, and you have a sort of a confidence that you are going in the right direction. And it's not something that you actually have to think about very much. It's just happening, and there is this great free flow. But I don't think there's any danger of you being swept away, because this Grand Trine in water signs, Saturn is involved. Venus is trine Saturn, Mars is trine Saturn, and the Moon is trine Saturn. So you are able to keep a firm control on what is going on, but the kind of control that is not destroying it. Because if you've got a lot of action, a lot of emotional action, things are really flowing, and you try to control it in a sort of a clumsy way, you kill the magic, but you're not going to kill the magic. And so I think that actually you can harness what is going on and allow whatever the energy is to suit you and to suit your purposes. So I think that it could actually be quite a constructive weekend. Now, do be a little careful about who you share your life with, because this weekend there is a square aspect between Mercury and Mars. Mercury, ruler of Virgo, your opposite sign. So Mercury can be a representative of someone else, can be someone else. Mercury square Mars, if we use that symbolism, we could say Mercury square Mars, someone who is annoyed, and that someone is not you, or someone who doesn't necessarily know how to behave. They use words that are grating. So be wary of other people, particularly if you're sharing the weekend with another person, and perhaps don't take them too seriously, in the sense, don't take their words too seriously. The things you hear, the things you read, when you sort of read, I don't know what people write in emails or text messages, or even if they say it, or indeed tell it to you face to face, you could perhaps respond in a bad way. But maybe you need to understand that, we are talking all the time. It's like with me and me and these videos. I do these 2-hour videos, and sometimes in the 2 hours I just will, what do they say, misspeak. I'm just trying to say something. I'm a Gemini, and so many words come out. One does occasionally make the odd mistake, and I might even offend people. And so Pisces, do with this Mercury square Mars, don't allow yourself to be offended. Whether it's someone says something or writes something, because people are under pressure to communicate sometimes, and sometimes these words just are just inappropriate. Now, it could of course be that with this Mercury square Mars, that someone says something which tells you everything. What do they say? In vino veritas. What people say when they're drunk can actually reveal the true person. So it may be, with Mercury square Mars, that someone inadvertently gives the game away. They say something, and straight away you understand. You understand perhaps that someone cannot be trusted, or perhaps that someone shouldn't be part of your life. It can just be one word said wrong. If you feel that is a representative of who they are, then you're told the truth, and then you can act accordingly. But I don't want to take away from this weekend. I think that this weekend has this Grand Trine in water signs. Things are really moving, and as a Pisces, you understand this energy, and you understand all of that water. 5 planets in water signs. You understand it all, and I think this means that you're unlikely to be surprised, and to a great extent you can go with the flow and be happy. And of course, Saturn is involved with this Grand Trine in water, so you can take things that other people find complicated, perhaps overwhelmingly complicated. You can take them and actually you can make them useful. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time for me to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 16, contentment. Now this hexagram does come up rather a lot, or it seems to. And in the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, it's described as enthusiasm, but contentment, which is how it's translated by Greg Winkup in his translation of the I Ching, I think contentment is more suitable. And we perhaps start the weekend feeling content, but we have our worries. We're just wondering how good things really are, and how long things are going to last. And there just may be this feeling that trouble is on the way. Maybe this is connected with the fact that there's a Grand Trine in water signs. And Grand Trine in water signs is about the emotions, and it's about picking up on a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions, and we just pick up on stuff, and we just kind of feel that things are not quite right, and that things could go wrong very soon. Maybe more in society than in terms of our own lives, but we're just going to enjoy things while they last. Let's not worry too much about the future. And so, with this hexagram, there is a real sense of complacency here, that we might just not want to look ahead and just, it's a weekend, let's enjoy ourselves, it'll be fine. But it's not fine, and if we try to enjoy ourselves, and if we just try to be relaxed, it's not going to work, I don't think. I mean, sorry to be grim. I mean, it's not that grim, and there is a moving line. The 5th line moves, and the 5th line is completely strange. I mean, the 5th line it says, the bad news on the 5th line, what the I Ching says, is the bad news is we're sick. The good news is we're not going to die, and that's what it's saying. There's a certain malaise creeping in. It's not a malaise that's going to kill us, and it may actually be quite a good thing to have this malaise, because if we have this malaise, this feeling that things are not, on the surface things might look fine, but they're not really fine. If we have this malaise, that might restrict our actions, and perhaps it's because they restrict our actions, they prevent us from doing something that could be catastrophic. Hence, it's bad, we're sick, but we're not going to die. And it's almost because we have this malaise, we don't take the risks and we don't get ourselves into trouble. So that is a bit of a problem here. And so I think it's just perhaps important. It's an important time when we just need to contemplate the world, need to understand the world and see where the world is moving, and to be completely realistic. And I would see this sickness as not our sickness, but the sickness of the world in which we are living. And I think that we are very, very aware of this sickness. It is all around, and it just says something about the society in which we are in. Now, this line does move, the fifth line moving, and it does move to a different hexagram, and the hexagram it moves to is hexagram 45, which is gathering together. And this is a more optimistic hexagram, and it perhaps indicates that we shouldn't take the weight of the world on our shoulders, that we do need to perhaps interact with other people, see what other people have to say, and maybe if it's one of those situations perhaps where we either if we can either hang separately or we can hang together. So if you've got lots of people who are sort of maybe not miserable, but people have their concerns, but they're all very separate, then it's not going to work out. People don't have the strength to deal with future challenges. But if you come together with people, then you can start to look at the future in a more dynamic and less complacent way. On your own, the future might seem a bit scary. Again, not so much our personal futures, but the future of the world. But if we come together, we can think, oh, what are we going to do about it? What sort of action can we take? I mean, I suppose you could see a certain political dimension to this. I mean, I suppose in the United States we have a presidential election, and with a presidential election, it's interesting that when you look at what people say, both Democrats and Republicans, there are Democrats who are saying that if Trump wins, it is the end of civilization as we know it. This brings in dictatorship and whatever. By the same token, there are Republicans who say that if Kamala wins, it is likewise the end of civilization as we know it. Because, in fact, it goes back to there's also a fear of dictatorship. So whichever, I mean, literally, I'm just reading or remembering what the comments people have said, and so there is that sense of doom. And in the American context, I think for some people who are very politically active, that doom is especially strong. So how do you address that doom? I suppose gathering together, if you're in America and you're politically aware and you're concerned about, and you're terrified of Trump winning, or you're terrified of Kamala Harris winning, then go and do something about it. Gathering together, mix with people who are on your political wavelength, whatever that political wavelength might be. So that's one approach. But I think the overall sense is that if you're terrified of something, don't deal with it on your own. You need other people. Other people probably have the same fears as you. And okay, it might be an echo chamber, but that's not what the I Ching is saying. It's saying that people can come together and work out solutions and perhaps find a way of getting over the problem and sort of addressing the future with realism, but also with a certain sense of calmness. And finally, I want to look at the square aspect between Mercury and Mars, which happens today. So looking at the chart for the weekend, you can very much see this aspect. So let's just put Aries on the left. So there's Mercury in Libra, and there is Mars in Cancer, and that's what we've got this weekend. So on a sort of a personal level, and if you just use the symbolism, Mercury is about how we communicate. And so if Mercury is square Mars, we might want to communicate in a way that is angry. That's one approach. We might be very good with words. It might be an effective lawyer, perhaps. It could be someone who just assumes a conflict, and they're not afraid of tackling difficult issues. Mercury can also be about the way we think. And so someone with Mercury square Mars, there could be a lot of mental agitation there. I mean, that makes sense. And because of that mental agitation, it may be about thinking too much and thinking something too much, and it may turn into exaggeration. Certainly there's one chart I'm going to look at where we've got an example of someone with Mercury square Mars whose exaggeration with a supposed health product killed them. So that might be one approach to Mercury square Mars. So I don't think Mercury square Mars is in itself always going to be a bad aspect. I think it's going to be a difficult aspect for many people, but it can be very productive if we can find the right way to use that Mercury square Mars. So let's just look at some people who have Mercury square Mars, and then I'm going to look at some events, and where there is something unusual about the chart and the person's experience, that might just give us some added ideas about what Mercury square Mars might mean. So I'll start off with a couple of singers. I don't really know much about singers, but here's the chart of Tina Turner. I think she die quite recently. Obviously, Tina Turner at her peak was a huge star, and she was a sun in Sagittarius. I mean, I think from just looking at sort of brief clips of her, she seemed to be a very Sagittarian person, and she had the sun in Sagittarius and she had Mercury in Sagittarius, and her Mercury, look at her Mercury in Sagittarius square Mars. So I would guess that this is someone who could be very vocal, very expressive, and I suppose this might be a fortunate chart in the sense that a person who is able to use her chart in a constructive way. You can certainly see how Mercury square Mars could be difficult, but if she throws her Mercury square Mars into music, into singing and communicating, you can see that would be a perfect way to use that Mercury Mars energy. Another very famous singer who likewise I know very little about is Aretha Franklin. So Aretha Franklin there's her Mercury in Pisces, square Mars in Gemini. Now, she had Mercury conjunct the South Node in Pisces. That might suggest that there are all sorts of issues going on in her home, or perhaps with her relationship with her father. I mean, I know that she had a difficult life, and that might be reflected in other things in her chart. But Mercury, there's her Mercury square Mars, which must have helped in terms of communicating something. If she's got Mercury in Pisces, it's not a great placement for Mercury, particularly as it's conjunct the South Node. It can be confused, it can be overwhelmed, but perhaps Mercury square Mars is encouraging her to actually verbalize that, give it the energy, and allow it to express itself. So if you've got Mercury square Mars and you becoming a singer would be a very good way to use the energy. Now, with Aretha Franklin's chart, just a reminder that the two planets of communication are Mercury and the Moon. And what I find interesting about, and in fact what I find important about Aretha Franklin's chart, is the position of the Moon. There are all sorts of problems in Aretha Franklin's chart. I'm not going to really go into it in detail. I'm not going to go into it at all. But her Moon is absolutely fantastic. Her Moon is in Cancer. It's a nighttime chart. Its Moon is above the horizon. It's in Cancer. It's not just in its own sign, but it's the Moon as a feminine planet, feminine sign. And Moon in Cancer, that's perhaps a big part of how she's able to communicate. And so it's not just Mercury is not the only planet of communication. The moon is a planet of communication also, and that is a fantastic moon. And I'm sure that moon made her successful. It wasn't the Mercury square Mars that made her successful. It was that moon in Cancer, in the ninth house, in a really nice place. But so with Tina Turner and Aretha Franklin, we can see how Mercury square Mars might be able to work. Now, another person I don't know much about, but it's just it's sort of a question, is Barron Trump. Now, with Barron Trump, we don't really know much about his personality. Obviously, his mother has been, doing her best to protect him and from a very difficult environment. And he has Mercury in Pisces rising, and he has got its square Mars. Now, it's tempting to regard that Mercury-Mars square as, in the first instance, not being about him, but about being about his father. So if you take the standard Western approach, you would say, well, the fourth house is the father, 10th house is the mother, ruler of the fourth house is Mercury in Pisces, so there's his Mercury in Pisces, and it is square Mars. And so Mercury square Mars may just be descriptive of his father. And Mars, if you take the whole sign house system, then Mars is in the fourth house. Even using Placidus, it's pretty close to the fourth house cusp. So we could say an angry father, perhaps a father who says a lot, who often doesn't think through what he says. And I suppose Barron's challenge is to integrate that Mercury square Mars. Now, what does that say about him? I don't know. We don't know. But with Mercury square Mars, some form of communication is going to be important. You could say that his father, as being this, whatever you think of Trump, there's no doubt he says a great deal. He's always saying something. His father is this massive communicator. And so you could say that his father is dominating the communication channels. If you're Barron Trump, how can you communicate when you've got such a massively communicative father? Your father is seizing everything. And so Barron Trump's challenge, his challenge to integrate the communicativeness of his father, it's going to be a big challenge, but that's perhaps something that he has got to work on. Now, Mercury square Mars, I suppose, can be about the law, and an example of a lawyer, in fact two lawyers who got Mercury square Mars, lawyers who became politicians, who were born very close to each other, is, there's Christie, who was the former governor of New Jersey. Now, if you look at Christie when he's interviewed on, or when he's talking on panels and whatever, he's quite quick to use strong language, and there is his Mercury square Mars. And I believe Christie, before he became a politician, was a lawyer, and so that could be how Mercury square Mars is working in his case. He's got a lot to say. He has opinions. Mercury square Mars, he's got a weight problem, or he has had a weight problem. And I'm wondering if that might actually be related to his Mercury square Mars. I don't have a time of birth for him. That could be Mercury square Mars. There's a certain tension to Mercury square Mars. And maybe he isn't able to burn off all this tension. And maybe if the tension of something is not burnt off, it manifests in other ways. And maybe that might be overconsumption, and that might have something to do with his weight issues. And Mars is in Cancer. Mars is a sign which can be about nutrition. Who is providing that food? What does food mean in a psychological sense? And so that might be how Mercury-Mars is working with Christie. Now, someone who was born, also a lawyer and a politician, who was born very close to Christie, who is just a couple of days older, is the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, born September the 2nd, 1962. And he likewise has Mercury square Mars. He, before he went into politics, was a successful lawyer and barrister. I mean, it doesn't matter what you think of him, he was a successful lawyer. And he was, I think, famous for taking on the McLibel case. I think he was involved in the McLibel case. So the McLibel case was a group of people who were, I believe, sued for libel by McDonald's, because I don't know what they'd said, and for large amounts of money. And Keir Starmer was a lawyer who took on their case, and I think he didn't charge for it, or charge very little. I don't think, or whatever. And he came over as being the good guy, and I think McDonald's lost, or I don't quite know what happened in that case. So there's him as a lawyer. Unlike Christie, though, he's not a very effective communicator. I mean, he's not very good. He's not a very good public speaker, as far as I can see. And with Mercury Mars, in terms of interviews, there's a certain petulance to him, I would have said. He doesn't like being challenged. That's kind of fits with Mercury square Mars. Though with Mercury square Mars, I suppose he has to be into details. If you're a British politician, you do have to know the details. You need to know your brief, and I'm sure he's very good at reading the papers he has to read. So with Keir Starmer, I suppose in a constructive sense, successful lawyer. Well, a successful politician in the sense that he's got to be Prime Minister. We don't know how long he's going to stay as Prime Minister. I think his administration is turning into a disaster, but he certainly has Mercury square Mars in his horoscope. Now, if you are angry about something, Mercury square Mars can be about being angry, and you might want to go and do something about it. And an example of someone who decided was angry and they just had to do something about it was David Frankfurter. So David Frankfurter was a Jewish student born in Croatia, and he was really, really upset about Nazism. Nazism really bothered him, and so you can imagine there's his fairly exact Mercury and Gemini square Mars in Mercury square Mars in Pisces, and Mercury's conjunct Pluto, and so Mars square Pluto. If it was just Mercury square Mars, maybe he would just get angry about Nazism and just feel, just get angry about it. But Pluto perhaps was a call to action. He got so obsessed about it that he felt he had to do something about it. And strangely, his action probably saved his life in a weird kind of way. But he was in Switzerland, and there was a a Swiss Nazi leader in Switzerland, Wilhelm Gustloff, and who lived in Davos. Remember Davos? That's where the World Economic Forum has its meetings. And so he went to Davos, and I think he got an interview with Wilhelm Gustloff, and he just shot him. And that's what he did. So he was concerned about Nazism in Switzerland, and he shot the main Nazi in Switzerland, and that's what he did, and that's how he worked off his anger. Now, you could say that because of his actions, you could say that saved his life, because he was arrested and sent to prison for life, and this was in 1936, and he spent the entire war in prison. Probably if it hadn't have happened, been the case, he probably would have been somewhere else in Europe and would have perhaps been sent off to the camps and whatever. I mean, his family were all wiped out in the Holocaust, but he just stayed in a Swiss prison through the war, and at the end of the war he was released and he went to Israel. But he is an example of how Mercury square Mars can operate. Now, Mercury square Mars can also be about obsessive behavior. So here is Eben Byers. So Eben Byers Eben Byers, he wasn't born in 1880. He was an American, and he was really into sports, and I think he was into golf. And you can see that there's something with Mercury square Mars, very closely square Mars, and it's also connected with Jupiter. So you can see with Jupiter conjunct Mercury square Mars, Jupiter can create a certain sense of, I don't have Eben Byers' time of birth, of going over the top, just taking something to extreme. You start doing something and you just keep doing it. Now, I think he had a sports injury, and it annoyed him, and he was looking for some cure for his injury. So what he did was he went to someone who suggested, I mean, this was just after was it in the 20s or the 30s, 20s, suggested he tried some radium water, when radium became all the rage, and you had little vials of radium water, and he drank this radium and he felt really good, and it made him feel really better, and he just kept drinking radium water, and in a completely obsessive way, and this is Mercury square Mars. But in the end, he just disintegrated. There's a picture of him just before he died. His whole jaw had just been removed, had just been fallen away with the radium. And so that's perhaps a warning with Eben Byers, that you have to be careful with Mercury square Mars, that you don't go over the top. You don't get obsessed with one thing and you keep doing it to the point of destruction. And Mercury square Mars can also act quickly without necessarily thinking through the consequences of its actions. So here is this is a chart I have looked at before, the horoscope of Maxim Kuzminov. And so Maxim Kuzminov was a helicopter pilot in the Russian military, and there's his Mercury at 10 Gemini, square Mars, square Mars. So there is this agitation with Mercury square Mars. He's always sort of thinking about what to do and what to do next, and perhaps having a certain sense of dissatisfaction, and perhaps making things a little bit complicated for himself. And so he defected to Ukraine with his helicopter, and he took two of his colleagues with him. And so he defected, and his colleagues were executed by the Ukrainians. But he got his money, he got his 30 pieces of silver, and that might be Mercury square Mars. And it's perhaps thinking too much. He claimed that he was doing a lot of research on the internet, and he decided, having done all this research on the internet, that Russia was completely wrong and that Ukraine was in the right. Maybe that's true, Mercury square Mars. Maybe that's why he did it. But Mercury just went too far, and just got caught on something, and then he defected to Ukraine, and as you can imagine, he didn't last very long, because he got his money and he went to Spain, and someone, possibly some Russian secret service or whatever, tracked him down and killed him. I mean, that's kind of what happens when you defect. But I think the issue here is he he flew in a plane. It wasn't just he defected with 2 people on board, and those 2 people were executed, and murdered by the Ukrainians. So that's Maxim Kuzminov's chart, and I just think we can perhaps see Mercury-Mars just being a little bit obsessive there, and perhaps thinking too much. Oh, and also look at Jupiter. It's not just Mercury square Mars. It's got Mercury opposition Jupiter square Mars. This T square, he just wasn't satisfied with the way things were, and he pushed things, and in the end it didn't just lead to his defection, but it led to his death, and of course the death of 2 of his colleagues. So that's him. And final person I want to look at is Stephen Hawking. Again, don't have a time of birth for Stephen Hawking. And with Stephen Hawking, he has Mercury square Mars. There are a number of ways of looking at that Mercury square Mars. You could say that he has Mercury Mars. You could say that that is him pushing a particular view, putting a lot of energy into his mind. That's one approach. Mercury square Mars, it's a very close Mercury square Mars, and that may say something about his disease. He had motor neuron disease, and so Mercury does represent the nerves and the neurons and the brain, and so Mars is a malefic. It's quite a strong malefic here because it's Mars in Aries, and that may say something about how his disease progressed, or why he might have been vulnerable to it. I don't know. I'm not saying that Mercury square Mars has a connection with motor neuron disease. I'm just looking at his chart, in isolation. And his Mercury also is trine Neptune, and it's trine Uranus. So his Mercury is just, he's part of a Grand Trine, and it's square Mars. So you can see that Mercury is under a lot of pressure. Now that may, clearly he was someone who had very strong opinions, not just about science, but he had opinions about politics. I believe he was, very opposed to the Conservative government. He was very opposed to Britain leaving the European Union. So he was very strong about his opinions across the board. And so that's Mercury square Mars. But there might have been a sense in which it had something to do with his disease. Now, the link between Mercury and nerves is also shown by this chart for the first synthesis of taboon on December the 23rd, 1936. So taboon was synthesized with, there you can see Mercury. It's not exactly square Mars, but there's Mercury at 19 Capricorn and Mars at 22 Libra. So what is taboon? So taboon is a nerve gas. It was the first, I believe it was the first nerve gas to be synthesized. And that's why the Germans built up nerve gas stocks during the Second World War, which they never used. But it was, I think he was originally playing with an organophosphate, which was a pesticide, and he accidentally synthesized nerve gas. And Mercury is the nerves. Mars, I suppose, is the agitation to the nerves, a thing attacking the nervous system. And so as far as I'm concerned, that does make a certain amount of sense. And another event with Mercury square Mars, so many things happened in this chart, so I'm not saying that we can really pin it down to Mercury square Mars. Chernobyl happened when Mercury was square Mars. Mercury was at where's Mercury gone? I've lost Mercury. Mercury's at 10 Aries, Mars at 13 Capricorn. So that was all part of the whole problem. There were tons of things going on with Chernobyl, but Mercury square Mars was one of those things that did happen. And finally, the Easter Rising in Dublin, really the start of the struggle for Irish independence, was on April 24th, 1916, and there is Mercury square Mars, perhaps Mars rising if I've got the time right. So Mercury square Mars, you can see agitation, and this is when it happened, and it's violence, but there's a proclamation, and I think there was a proclamation of independence, and you could say that links with Mercury square Mars. Anyway, those are a few thoughts on Mercury square Mars. I hope you found that of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again very soon.